Good morning, neighbor. I'm so excited to get to share this new month with you. Now, you may be wondering why I just called you neighbor, because I'm pretty sure, and you may have picked up on this, that none of us live on the same street. We're not actually neighbors. But there's something you may not know, and that's that every one of us are neighbors. And it doesn't matter how close we live to each other. Everyone you meet is your neighbor, regardless of where they live, and every one of those people is worthy of your care and your kindness and your compassion. And that's what we're talking about this month. We're talking all about compassion. So we're going to kick off this month with a story about, you guessed it, Jesus. Now, most of what we know about Jesus comes from the stories that are told about him in the Bible. So we know about the great story of his birth, because we celebrate that every year at Christmas time. And we know that when he was a child, not too much older than you guys are, that he traveled to the Passover feast with his parents and then got left behind. And then they found him several days later outside the synagogue, listening to other religious leaders and talking with them and learning. We know that his earthly father was a carpenter and that he learned that skill from him. And then we know that when he was about 30 years old, he went down to the Jordan River and he asked his older cousin John to baptize him with water there. And we know that when he rose from that water, that God's voice called out from heaven and he let everyone know that this was his son and that he was pleased with him. And then we know that after this, Jesus went out into the wilderness and he spent 40 days alone with God, getting ready to take on his ministry, and that then he returned to Galilee, filled with the power of God's Holy Spirit. Now, after that, we know that everywhere Jesus went, he would go to the house of worship there and he would teach. And everywhere that he did this, people were amazed and they praised his teaching. Until Jesus came to Nazareth, the town that he grew up in. Now, just like he did in every other town, on the Sabbath day, Jesus went into the synagogue and he stood up to read from the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, which had been written hundreds of years before his birth. And this is what he read that day. "The Spirit of the Lord is on me. He has anointed me to announce the good news to poor people. He has sent me to announce freedom for prisoners. He has sent me so that the blind will see again. He wants me to free those who were treated badly, and he has sent me to announce the year when he will set his people free." Then Jesus rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down. And everybody just looked at him. And so then Jesus stood back up and he told the people that this passage that he had just read was coming true right in front of their eyes. In other words, he was declaring that he himself was the that he was the Messiah that God had promised, that those words were written about him. Now, everyone again just looked at each other and looked at him. These people had seen Jesus grow up. They knew him. And now he was saying that he was God's Messiah? They couldn't accept it. They couldn't make this make sense. It was just too much. Who did he think he was, declaring to be the Messiah? Well, the people were furious and they ran Jesus out of town, but they were overlooking the point of what Jesus was trying to say. He didn't tell them these things to brag or to feel important. He was telling them what he did because he wanted them to know that he had come to make things right. He had come to teach about God and to show how they and we can have a relationship with God forever. See, Jesus lived a life of compassion. He helped people in need and he showed God's love in everything that he did. And then he taught that when we follow him, we need to live that way too. And that's our bottom line this week, guys. Following Jesus means caring about others.